Hello everyone, and welcome to Episode 0 of Vampire the Masquerade by the Book, an intro to what will ultimately be a ridiculously long series going through the history and lore of VTM book by book, thus the title. The key thing here will be to focus on the lore and story content in each book and seeing how everything evolved as it went. I'll also throw in a lot of real-world info relating to the book itself and people at White Wolf and such where I can. There's a lot of history to see here, and some of these books can be difficult to find. Many writers and artists have been part of things along the way, and I'll likely come across some fun stories relating to the material on occasion that I plan to include. With each video, I will provide links, where possible, in the description so you can get the book yourself if you'd like. I plan to do this as close to publication order as I can, which will be a little tricky near the beginning since copyright data generally lists only the year a book came out, the exception of this being things that are multi-part pieces of the same story. You'll see this more with things like the novels, but it will happen on occasion with the TTRPG books as well, such as the 4-part Giovanni Chronicles. This will be done to try and keep from breaking up a cohesive story where it may be present. Some of these may be combined into a single, longer videos, and some may be kept separate depending on what works best. Otherwise, books will have individual videos even if they're very short, so video length will vary depending on the material. I may also do all the clan books together when I reach them, just to hold to the theme, but I'll decide that when I get closer to those. In addition, I'm going to try to do as little backtracking as possible. Certain books, especially when we hit new editions or alternate releases such as the Mind's Eye Theater LARP books, may repeat a lot of previously covered info, and I want to avoid reiterating the same info over and over, so I'll probably call attention to a previous video where that info is covered. I'll try to keep focus primarily on the story being told or to the new information that is revealed for a clan, concept, or the metaplot as books release, so the videos will build on each other and hopefully keep the length down a little bit. I'm most familiar with the 5th edition of the game, and though I have a strong working knowledge of a lot of the legacy lore, this will be the first time I've ever directly read any of the books beyond some of the stuff in the 20th anniversary. I titled this first video Episode 0 as I will not be starting with the core rulebook just yet, and instead will cover some info about White Wolf and the lead up to the creation of Vampire, along with some materials that appeared shortly before the original book was released. As always, if you have any suggestions on what you think does or doesn't work in the video, or if there's something that you'd like to see done differently or get more focus, feel free to let me know in the comments. If you know much about Vampire and the world of darkness in general, it will come as no surprise that the dark, edgy, horror-themed RPG made in the early 90s by a bunch of tabletop nerds in the US is going to contain some content that is cringy at best and deeply problematic at worst. From the very beginning, concepts like the jihad, the origins and stereotypes present in numerous clans, and various other concepts in the game were rife with cultural appropriation, heavy use of negative stereotypes, misunderstandings, negligence, and poor research pertaining to foreign locations, and even some locations in the US. These are all part and parcel with the writing from the very beginning. Much of this improves over time, and many of the worst concepts have been iterated out over the years, but not all. That aside, as we're looking at the original material, know that these videos will come across all of this in its original form. Please keep in mind that I myself am some random nerd from the Midwest US, and may not be properly in tune with what content therein has been improperly appropriated, or may be problematic to a culture or group of people, but I will do my best to try and catch it when I can. Please understand that if I'm missing something, it is out of unintended ignorance, and not intentional. Many of the books I will cover will also contain content that may not be appropriate for everyone. Vampire in particular contains a lot of material that leans into themes of assault, both physical and mental, and various other shades therein, at its core. And a number of titles will lean into other heavy, dark, and taboo subjects on things that not everyone may be able to handle or be willing to engage with. I will also try to note these where I can via content warnings in the description of the videos, if nothing else. Something else to keep in mind as we take this journey through the books is that there is a fundamental difference in the content that will be discussed, and I wanted to clarify some terminology that might pop up. Being as VTM is a TTRPG, there is rarely going to be a cut and dry narrative to anything that comes up. The background information, the world building, and the events that have come before the time of the setting in which players play the game are what many refer to when they speak of lore. It is the established elements of the setting that drive the game from its starting point. The nature of a TTRPG is in the players playing the game and driving their own stories using the lore as that fundamental base setting. What is known as Metaplot is story content that is happening in real time with the setting of the game and drives new and active events regardless of, and at times maybe even in spite of, players and their own games. This is something that really came into the forefront in VTM during the revised edition, and some cite it as a reason for the game's waning popularity and ultimate cancellation. Much of what we'll see early on is going to be purely lore, with some in-universe stories told via small works of fictional accounts scattered throughout the books, with no real cohesive narrative to them. Keep in mind, regardless of the info that is covered, that much of it comes from the standpoint of what is called an unreliable narrator. Especially in the case of in-world information, the account might not always be accurate or truthful, and the person relaying it, as well as their goals and intentions, can skew the information they provide. Due to this unreliable narration, there may be conflicting information throughout the videos. I'll try to note when something is coming from an in-character or world account, as that will often help differentiate between things that are merely misconception or misinformation versus material that may be intended as a change in continuity, aka retcon, between editions. Now, we travel back to the year 1990, when members of the newly created White Wolf Games Studio, formed from the merger of Lion Rampart Games and White Wolf Magazine, were traveling to Gen Con. During this trip, the group passed through Gary, Indiana. Gary was a city established in the early 1900s centered around a massive steel mill whose industry led to a boom for the city throughout the first half of the century. At one point, the mill employed around 30,000 people in the city. Around the 1960s, the industry, and thus the city, fell into decline, and 30,000 jobs turned into 6,000 jobs by 1990, and efforts to bolster the city's economy failed to reverse the decline. At one point, it was estimated that roughly 1/3 of all homes in the city were unused or abandoned. By 1990, the once bustling city looked nearly empty. Amid the urban decay and desolate feelings of the city, former writer Travis Williams remarked that it felt like a place time forgot, the group questioning who would live in a place like that. As the story goes, one of them, Mark Reinhagen, spoke up. His answer? Vampires. This was the origin of what would be Vampire the Masquerade. Reinhagen reminisced that he was often a bit of a party animal at Gen Con, but that year was different. Instead of partying, he wrote, coming up with the idea and forming the basis for the storyteller system and VTM. In a time when most TTRPGs dealt with being a hero and slaying monsters, Vampire presented the concept of being the monster. What do you do now, when your life has already ended, and you have joined the ranks of immortal creatures of the night? Pulling largely from popular vampire media of the time, in particular vampire movies of the 80s such as The Lost Boys and Near Dark, Mark would form the basis for the concepts we know today. He famously claims to have not read and avoided reading Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles novels at the time in an attempt to not, quote, taint his work. What he didn't realize at the time, however, was that pretty much everything that he loved and based his work on were themselves influenced by her work, causing clear inspirations regardless of intent. One of the things that stood out for many people when VTM first released was the art, in particular that of Tim Bradstreet, whose full-page art was worked throughout the original core book, heading up each chapter and featuring in many other books for the game and truly punctuating the Gothic-Punk vibe that Vampire wanted to express. By the time Vampire was ready to go, White Wolf had little to no money left. They had commissioned some art, and what had originally been intended for the cover was ultimately rejected as it did not, quote, feel right. This cover would eventually be used for the player's guide, but Chris McDonough wanted to do something more abstract. Extremely low on funds and with very few options available to them, they bought a bunch of roses and a green slab of marble, and with a photograph, the iconic Vampire the Masquerade cover came into existence. Vampire the Masquerade would ultimately release on July 4th, 1991, though it was originally slated for May, and ads soon began to appear for it. One such ad appeared in the February-March 1991 issue of White Wolf Magazine, issue number 25. At this time, many concepts that would appear in the game were not yet set in stone. Early ads and other promotional material showed that even the title had not yet fully landed, with it simply being called Vampire, and some of the terminology differing, if only slightly. In the follow-up issue of White Wolf Magazine, a small preview of what was to come featured at the center of the issue. I believe the preview was also put out as a standalone booklet, and have noted listings for it via product pages on the White Wolf wiki, but I've never been able to find a copy, so can't verify if they were in fact the same or not. The bulk of this episode will focus on this preview, offering small glimpses into the world to come, both via in-world narration sections, as well as explanations of the world and themes from outside the setting. Most, if not all of these entries featured in the preview booklet come from the core book and other early releases for VTM, but in some cases were slightly altered with the changes the final revision would adapt to. In addition, numerous pieces of art were featured which would appear as covers for supplemental books, along with a product list that offers an interesting insight into the original publishing plans for the series. I am not a man. I am life in death, a monster to thee. I swim upon the night currents, watching, waiting for when your neck shall be raised unto me. The preview opens with this quote and a pencil drawing that spans a full 2-page spread depicting a vampire on a rooftop. In the story written here, we meet an unnamed vampire lurking in a dark alley. He stalks a woman, drawn to the scent of her blood. He moves to attack, but resists the urge to strike at the last second, biting his tongue in restraint. The next page features art by Jeff Starling that would later be used for the cover of the first edition book Bloodhunt, accompanied by an untitled poem fragment from Keats written near the end of his life, often referred to as the living hand. This living hand, now warm and capable of earnest grasping, would, if were cold, and in the icy silence of the tomb, so haunt thy days and chill thy dreaming nights, that thou would wish thine own heart dry of blood, so in my veins red life might stream again, and thou be conscious calm, so here it is, I hold it toward you. Following this is a story titled Indian Summer, wherein we are first introduced to a number of concepts that will eventually become familiar in lore of VTM. We meet a vampire by the name of Johann Veltman, who, quote, had it all, wealth, power, influence, and immortality. He reminisces about the latter, which came to him with uncomfortable ease after spending his life struggling for the rest. Age 69 and on his deathbed, he was visited by an unnamed Malkavian and embraced as he lay dying. The embrace is described as a thing of excruciating pain, though it is implied that this is not normal. The embrace did not break him, or drive him mad as he believes his sire expected. Ultimately, he got his revenge by setting her on fire after driving a stake through her heart. Johann shakes off his reminiscence and thinks of the coming of Gehenna, something that has been dominating his thoughts of late. It is revealed that Johann had been a filmmaker during the era of black and white films, but though his films were often seen as classics now, during his original lifetime they were met with scathing reviews. Johann goes out to clear his thoughts and look for a target to feed on, which he finds near the Succubus Club, but senses the presence of another of his kind in the process. He is drawn to a nearby department store that he sneaks into, where he finds a boy who appears to be around 14 watching music videos on a TV with headphones on. Though he knows they are one of the kin and suspects the boy is of Clan Bruja, he leaves him alone to return to hunting, believing he is simply passing through and does not intend to disturb the peace. Returning to his target, he watches the man in a bar throughout the night, even using his powers to plant a suggestion to the bartender that she finds the man attractive, and they leave together at the end of the night. Johann decides not to pursue the man to feed on him, as he is not so hungry that he can't be magnanimous. Instead, he starts walking to return to where his driver parked, but is distracted by a neon sign with an hourglass that he stares at for a long time, and is ultimately jumped by 4 thugs who threaten him and want his money. Though he is a vampire, he is concerned that he cannot take all 4 and tries to scare them, though it only works in part. Before they can do anything to him, however, the young kindred whom Johann had observed in the department store attacks the man from behind with a lead pipe, dispatching them quickly. The boy introduces himself as Damien, and Johann invites him to his haven to show thanks. Over the course of the story, we are introduced to a number of concepts that play a major part in VTM. Clans, with Malkavian and Bruja being specifically mentioned, the kiss, Vitae, the embrace, Gehenna is named, though not properly described, and we see mention of the notorious Succubus Club, placing the events in Chicago, as we will learn in a future book. Finally, we see an early name for vampires, who were called kin in this early vision as opposed to kindred. We also see a hint of the powers Johann and Damien possess, though none are named directly. Next, we're greeted with an image done by Doug Anderson that would be used as the cover for Ashes to Ashes, accompanied by a quote from the poet Lord Byron. But first, on earth as vampires sent, thy corpse shall from its tomb be rent, then ghastly haunt to thy native place, and suck the blood of all thy race. It comes from the poem The Giaour, and is notable as being one of the earliest published mentions of vampires and vampirism, preceded only by John Stagg's poem The Vampire in 1810. It was also a major influence on Edgar Allan Poe. This section contains a short narrative describing your existence now as one of the kin, speaking of the power and resilience you now hold, but also warning of the danger of the sun. It notes that you are not alone, but that the playground is only big enough for so many, and that though the others can be called brothers and sisters, even brother may kill brother, as did the first of your kind. Here we become aware of the Camarilla, a group that attempts to maintain a semblance of peace among the kin, and we learn of the Jihad, the game of elders that never ends. We are told of ancients that sleep, but they will awaken, and when they do, then shall Gehenna come again to the world. All fear the coming end of the third cycle. Finally, we are told of the beast within, and how it could rise at any time to destroy what you dare to love, and the dread of the humanity that slowly slips away from you. It is yourself that makes your life a nightmare, not the perils and enemies you face. The next section begins with an in-world quote from the Book of Nod. In the beginning, there was only Cain. Cain who murdered his brother out of anger. Cain who was cast out. Cain who was cursed forever with immortality and a lust for blood. It is Cain from whom we all come, our sire's sire. Following this is another short narrative titled A Culture of Blood, which details life in vampire society to a new member of the Camarilla. It speaks of the Camarilla and princes who hold domain over cities, and that their strength is what sets them apart. The strength to exert their will and hold that domain against all others. Also described are a number of rules that people familiar with VTM will know is an early version of the traditions, though it speaks directly only of those we know as the traditions of progeny, accounting, hospitality, and destruction. The section also lays out the primary factions, called tribes at this point, aside from the Camarilla, described here as the largest of them, who live among mortals and seek to control and prey upon society. There are the Ikanu, who are referred to as loosely affiliated with the Camarilla, and consist of elders who seek to distance themselves from other kin in an attempt to remove themselves from the Jihad. Finally, they describe the Sabbat, the great enemies of the Camarilla, psychotic diabolists who live outside of mortal society but still prey upon it. In North America, it is said they control New York, Miami, Toronto, Montreal, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Portland, and Philadelphia, alongside many smaller cities. It notes that they bury their newly embraced alive, and only a few manage to free themselves. The rest remain in the ground for eternity. The Sabbat are said to have an important role in the Jihad, though they are not directly under the control of the ancients. Next, it speaks of the importance of lineage, and the concept of clans, and describes those within the Camarilla. The Ventru, old-fashioned and stuffy, but dignified, who tend to be the leaders. The Toreador, exuberant and self-occupied, self-proclaimed artists. The Nosferatu, described as rivals of the Toreador. Hideous and monstrous, they must live in the sewers and away from mortal society. The Gangrel, wanderers by nature and known for their shape-shifting, closely associated with the Romani and, according to rumor, werewolves. The Bruja, chosen from the rebels of society, aggressive and arrogant. The Tremere, secretive, mystical, and hierarchical, rumored to have ties to a magical past. And finally, the Malkavians, described as unpredictable and uncontrollable in their insanities, not to be trusted. Finally, it warns that though you must be wary of hunters, other vampires are far more worthy of fear. Some elders have blood that is thinned, and may only feed on other vampires. Many create childers solely for this purpose, noting that one cannot be bloodbound by their own progeny, and that is why you have been created. This section closes with a quote from German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. Therefore, with the same necessity with which stone falls to earth, the hungry wolf buries its fangs in the flesh of its prey, without the possibility of the knowledge that it itself is the destroyed as well as the destroyer. The next page opens with a quote from the song Disintegration by The Cure. Oh, I miss the kiss of treachery, the aching kiss before. I feed the stench of a love for a younger meat, and the sound that it makes when it cuts in deep. This section is titled Gothic-Punk, and is an introduction to and description of Vampire as a game, describing it as not what you might be used to, stating that to understand it, you must understand the mood and atmosphere of the game. Vampire is a new Gothic vision of romance laid atop today's hyperkinetic MTV world. Dracula meets Prince. It tries to drive home the concept of playing a monster, doomed from the start by their cursed existence, where morality is chosen and not ordained. No matter your choices, you remain what you are, a monster. For justice to truly be served, good must triumph over evil. The monster must lose. The only way to win is to cage the beast within, and nurture your waning humanity. Even so, in the end, some heroes must make the ultimate sacrifice. It also speaks of adventures complicated by political intrigues and the limits of working outside of society and opposed by others of your kind and still stranger supernatural creatures in the world, and notes that Vampire will release, quote, this May, 1991. Finally, it speaks of the contents contained within the Vampire core rulebook and explains some of the concepts therein, such as humanity, frenzy, willpower, and derangement. The next page greets us with another full-color image, this time by Dan Frazier, that would ultimately be used as the cover for the first edition player's guide. As noted previously, this was originally intended to be the cover of the core book, as discussed in the World of Darkness documentary. The image, much like the others, is accompanied by a quote from the song Moon Over Bourbon Street by Sting. It was many years ago that I became what I am. I was trapped in this life like an innocent lamb. Now I can never show my face at noon, and you'll only see me walking by the light of the moon. The brim of my hat hides the eyes of a beast. I have the face of a sinner, but the hands of a priest. Following this is one last written piece titled Monsters, Monsters Everywhere, that goes into the ideas about human imagination and monsters and leads into describing vampires as the quintessential fiend. A true reflection of humanity that expresses our deepest fears and the shadows of our primal urges. The final page of relevance in the preview opens with one final quote, this time from Midnight Rambler by the Rolling Stones. He don't give a hoot of a warning, wrapped up in a black cat cloak. He doesn't go in the light of morning, he's split the time the cockerel crows. Talking about the Midnight Rambler, the one you never seen before. From here, there is a list of scheduled releases for Vampire books. This list is of particular interest as many of the things noted here did not come out for quite some time, or not at all. First up was the Camarilla. The Camarilla would not see a standalone book until the revised edition in 1999. The White Wolf product code was not reused for anything else. The Last Supper. Described as an epic 5-part Giovanni Chronicle, this would eventually be released as part of the second edition of the game in 1995 as Giovanni Chronicles The Last Supper. Giovanni Chronicles would ultimately be a 4-part chronicle. The original product code would be reused instead for the first edition book Alien Hunger. The Hunters Hunted would be released in the first edition, but with a different product code than was listed here. The product code listed would later be reused for Chicago by Night 2nd edition. A World of Darkness, another book that would in fact release for first edition, but also with a different product code. The original product code listed for this title would later be reused for the revised core book. Who's Who Among Vampires? This book would ultimately release after the second edition core book as Who's Who Among Vampires, Children of the Inquisition, also with a different product code. The original product code intended for this book would later be used by the revised edition Vampire's Storyteller's Companion. Finally, it is stated that Vampire is only the first of 5 games for the Storyteller game system, all based on our own world and each of them a, quote, modern fable. It states that Werewolf would be second, then Magus, followed by Fairy, and finally, Ghost. We would eventually come to see all of these games in the form of Werewolf the Apocalypse, Mage the Ascension, Changeling the Dreaming, and Wraith the Oblivion. It also notes, because of their compatibility, it is simple to use one with the other, and together they create an all-encompassing game system. Something that is interesting to keep in mind moving forward, as over time, this philosophy would ultimately change. That wraps things up for the first installment, and the original preview of what would ultimately become Vampire the Masquerade. We'll jump into the first edition core book for episode 1. I'm about 2/3 of the way through reading it and taking notes now, so don't expect it to come super quick, but I won't be starting fresh on it either. I hope to see you there.